They measured the result. Then I told them which leaf we had sent intention to. So we had a nice little controlled experiment of an audience of about 600 in the UK sending intention to a leaf sitting in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay, let's stop and respect that fact. The people doing this experiment, sending their thoughts, were around the world, literally halfway around the world from Arizona.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yes. And, that happened with another experiment we did soon after. We wanted to do something practical. So we moved on to seeds. And this time we had a really controlled experiment. Again, with Dr. Schwartz's lab. We had 4 sets of 30 seeds each. His lab assistant photographed all 4 sets of seeds, sent me the photographs, and the plan was to send intention to make them grow by a certain amount, by a certain number of days. So the first place I was going to do this in was Sydney, Australia. I had an audience of about 700-800, and we randomly chose one of the 4 photos. We didn't tell the scientists which photo we were choosing.
You chose a photo, and you didn't even tell anyone which one you chose, and you sent intentions to that group of plants halfway around the world.
That group of seeds halfway around the world. Yep.
They weren't even plants yet.
They were 8,000. I know. They were just seeds 8,000 miles away. But here's the interesting thing. So we sent intention to the seeds after we finished sending intention. We told them we were done. They planted all 4 sets of seeds. They measured them 5 days later. And only then, after they'd finished their measurements, did we unblind the study and tell them which seeds we sent intention to. Now, we ran this 6 times, and every single time the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. And here's the interesting thing. I did it with different sizes of audiences, once over the internet with my audience just coming onto my website, and 5 other times with audiences in different places, from Sydney to Los Angeles to Dallas, Texas, etc. Now, here's the interesting point about it. First of all, we were not sending intention to the seeds. We were sending intention to a photographic representation.
That's what gets me. Yes, totally.
Yes. And then secondly, we weren't in the same room. And in the case of Sydney, Australia, we were 8,000 miles away. So it started me thinking this kind of ability to hone in on something made me realize that we were creating a kind of psychic internet, that consciousness has this ability to work across the miles. Not only do thoughts affect things, but thoughts can affect things miles and miles away.
I hope everyone understands how profound this is, because I'm sure this is happening even when it's not being done as an experiment. And it could be your negative thoughts as well as your positive thoughts, which is something I'm going to ask Lynn more about. So let's think about the state of the world now, and let's begin to wonder how much our negativity, in this country especially, but actually all over the world in various ways, is actually causing things to get steadily worse. It's a non-benevolent cycle, and it seems to be going on. You've just convinced me that's probably the problem, Lynn, but we have only just started to talk about this. But I know that occurred to you much sooner than it occurred to me, and you began to experiment with peace intentions. Talk about that.
Well, after I'd done a lot of work on seeds and water and things like that and leaves, I was starting to get a little tired of all of that. So I thought, let's do something huge. And so I persuaded a whole scientific team this time, because I worked with different scientists. I didn't want it just to be one laboratory. I wanted it to be lots of laboratories. So I got a team of about 4 different scientists at different locations, including University of California, one of the top statisticians in consciousness research, Dr. Jessica Utz, to agree to be part of a team that we'd set up an intention and that we would run it over 8 days. And the reason we did 8 days, we would run it for set times over 8 days, is that we were trying to look at who'd ever tried to do something in mass consciousness before. And of course, the transcendental meditation groups have done a lot of attempts at lowering violence with mass meditation. And they've had some really interesting results. So we wanted to build on that, because this time we would actually set an intention to lower violence. So I needed a place. According to Dr. Utz, she told me, you've got to find a place where they've been counting the bodies for a couple of years before our experiment and are doing it consistently afterward. So I looked around the world. Well, in war zones, people don't.
Oh, yes.
They don't, and they lie about it. So we finally found a very reputable organization that was consistently logging in deaths and injuries in Sri Lanka, which at that time was undergoing a 25-year war. So we decided to set intention to lower violence in an area of northern Sri Lanka, which had been taken over by rebel forces. And this war, no one was winning. The government was making no headway. And the rebels, as I say, controlled the north. They had choked off the whole north of the country. So we set intention. This was back in 2008. We set intention over these 8 days, and we then patiently waited over some months to see what happened. And Dr. Utz took all of the data we had from 2 years before of weekly deaths and injuries to about 3 months afterward, and then worked on what the trend was to see if we'd bucked the trend. Now, the scary part was during the very week of our intention, violence went up, way up. And that scared me a lot. I went, wait, this isn't supposed to happen. But then it plummeted to well below what it had been before. And it stayed lower. But that wasn't even, and yes, we did buck the trend. The violence did go down. But that wasn't the interesting part of it. What it turned out to be was that during that very week of intention, the government won some very decisive battles, which completely turned around the course of the war. Within a few months, they were able to recapture the north from the rebels, and with a few months after that, this 25-year war ended. It ended in a bloody finish, but it ended, and Sri Lanka is a very peaceful place now.
Yes, I didn't even think it would be a place that would... Oh, my goodness. So this is the beginning. Think about this, everyone. This is the beginning, and so you were encouraged, and where did you go from there?
Well, we then decided to start looking at the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I was tired of those buildings coming down, so I wanted to see if we could do something different. So I had done a lot of speaking in the Middle East, and my host was always Dr. Salah Al-Rashid, who's like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. And I asked him to partner with me on this because he has a huge following among all of the Arab countries. And so he invited his audience, and I invited my Western audience to take part in an intention where we would send intention to 2 provinces in southern Afghanistan. And we, according to NATO statistics, we all sent intention over these 8 days again. We replicated the same kind of experiment. And according to NATO statistics, which I got from a German general who was part of the combined forces there was an unprecedented lowering of violence in just those 2 areas as opposed to the rest of the country. So that was interesting.
Yeah, interesting for sure.
But not as interesting as what kept happening with the peace experiments, which was that, yes, we were having some sort of effect, it would seem, although there's a lot of variables. You can say it's only when you keep doing it and you keep getting results that things start getting interesting. But the more interesting thing was what was happening to my participants. With the Sri Lanka experiment, I had surveyed them, and I got back information like this. I'm getting along better with my wife or my boss. I've made up with my estranged parents. I'm in love with everyone I come in contact with. People were hugging strangers. Something like half of all people said their relationships had fundamentally changed. Their lives were becoming more peaceful. And also they had described this altered state experience, being part of this intention experiment, had felt like they were part of a higher network, as one person put it, or they felt like they were in the tractor beam of Star Trek. They described loads of energy, feeling like they were in a mystical, altered state. Some people were crying uncontrollably. Other people were feeling like they had goosebumps coming up and down their arms. It was just extraordinary. And there were thousands of responses like this. Now, with the 9/11 anniversary, the really amazing thing happened on my Facebook and Instant Messenger pages, because the Muslims started writing to the Americans and vice versa. They started saying hello to each other. They started befriending each other, and they ended up starting to forgive each other.
Oh,
and
my word.
That was the really interesting piece of it. The rebound mirror effect was almost more significant than actually what was going on to the target.
So let's stop and think about this. First, what were the people doing to participate? Were they just sending good thoughts to a certain place, or what did you tell them to do?
I had on my website, first of all, they didn't know the target. And we had pages that our webmaster controlled that would be flipped over at a certain time. So people had to sign in. Then they got onto it. Then we explained how they got into a certain kind of mind state and head state based on a number of principles I've compiled from a lot of intention masters that are in the intention experiment, how to do intention, based on a kind of mix of ancient wisdom with indigenous practitioners of this and also modern things that work in the laboratory. So those are the certain techniques that I know now maximize intention. So we had people do that. Then we revealed the target. Then we revealed the intention statement. Everybody had to think the same thought at the same time, essentially, over about a 10-minute period while some music played.
And you said what the thought was. And they
yeah. Our intention is to lower violence by, I think it was 10%. We had a very, very specific intention, as we always do.
These people didn't know one another. They were all over countries, all over the world, and yet by doing this process, they were able to influence what was going on in a whole other country in a way which you could measure, right? I mean, it was obvious to the researchers that the result was positive.
Well, ours was just data taking from NATO. So, yeah, it was obvious. And this has been the situation with literally every peace intention experiment. We've done 5 of them. Every single one we've done has had some sort of measurable effect like this, and an extraordinary rebound effect among the participants.
Now, you did 2 that you talk about on your website that you now have, I think, results for. One was in the Middle East, which is a very important place to be doing this, and the other was in one of the worst places in this country for violence in the United States. So that's we'd like to hear how that turned out. Please tell us about those 2 experiments.
Sure. So in September, and it was over 6 days from September through October, first week of October, I worked with Gaia TV to do 6 broadcasts that would culminate every day in our participation, my audience's participation in a peace intention experiment. And I wanted to choose the most violent place in America. So according to the Wall Street Journal and many other places, the most violent place in America is a part of northern St. Louis, Missouri. Outdoes Chicago and all of those other places. And it's this one area, the Natural Bridge Avenue, part of it, and the neighborhood is called Fairground, and its Fairground consistently gets a D- for just so many areas, from crime to education to etc. It's a really tough area, and so this was really easy to track because the St. Louis Police Department keep very careful records of violent crimes against the person and property crimes in every neighborhood in St. Louis, as well as the place as a whole. So what we did was we sent intention over these 6 days, and then we waited for 6 months. And then Dr. Utz, the one who had done the Sri Lanka experiment, once again, I sent her data that was from 2014, September 2014, to March 2018. So from 3 years before our experiment to 6 months afterward, so that she could plot out what had happened. Now, she looked at 4 areas. She looked at violent crime in Fairground, our neighborhood we focused on, property crime in Fairground,